Hi, so this is week 6 Google Hangout, and this week we're down 2 classmates, so it's just going to be myself, Julian, and Jolene. And for this week, our prompt is to focus on defining ethics as a group, exploring how ethics shape leadership, and how ethic behavior is reflected in public leadership. So, Jolene or Julian, either one of you want to start?
I can go first.
Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. I think mine's really going to complete what we talked about last week regarding the situation from my previous employer with Wells Fargo. It kind of went like perfect into this topic, discussing ethical perspectives and different things with leadership. So I just want to point one thing out, which was interesting. Carrie Tolstead, who was the head of the community banking entire platform with Wells Fargo, was set to retire, and her compensation, including stock options and restricted stock units, is about 125 million. And
Wow.
so that's how much she's getting for her departure package, not including other 401ks and things along those lines. So it's just interesting to see that, even though, I mean, this was literally the person that ran, because each bank has different lines of business. So they'll have community banking, investment banking, commercial banking, and all these different things. And she was the one that headed the entire community banking project, which was people's accounts. So it's kind of interesting to see all right, well, this lady was heading everything, man or woman, whoever person was heading this thing, and now they're leaving and they're getting 125 million, and that's crazy. And that fell along the lines of page 340 in our book, which is the challenge of privilege. So it really talks about how some of these leaders that are in these really high up positions are making insane salaries. They're getting crazy bonuses. It's pretty much more, is that right, or is it wrong? Are they entitled to receive these benefits, or is it something that's just completely preposterous and they shouldn't be getting anything close? And so I think just along all those lines, it's interesting how many people were harmed from the damage that Wells Fargo did, whether they were employees who lost careers because of the pressure from the senior leaders there to do what they did and then they got fired, or the people that suffered from having different accounts opened and then closed and credit ran and things like that. And that affects mortgages, and that affects a lot of stuff in their life. So it's just a really nasty situation. And to see that the senior person that was running the whole program is leaving with 125 million, I'm not sure about you guys, but I don't think I'll ever make $125 million. And I don't think most people do. So it's pretty crazy to see that someone that has, I guess, that much of a negative impact can really just walk away with a significant balance. But the chapter was good. I thought ethics is a big part of leadership. I really believe on page 349, utilitarianism, it talks about how ethical choices should be based on consequences rather than individual duty. And so I think a lot of the problem with corporate America and a lot of these big companies is that a lot of the people that make these decisions, they don't understand all the consequences that can be in effect, because there's just so many different tiers and levels that are involved. And so they're more thinking of what the end goal is, as opposed to what could individually be the consequences of the people that are involved. So it's kind of tough, but I think that if most people try to take that as part of their perspective in making decisions and staying ethical in leadership positions, that might help kind of avoid situations like what we saw with the whole Wells Fargo scandal. But yeah, that was just kind of my piece for the week. Anyone else want to go?
Yeah, but I can go next. I thought of you when I saw the news this week, because I saw that they said, and it was interesting too, because the main CEO of the company denied that he didn't know anything about it. And I think that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the reading this week, I thought it was interesting how they brought up, should others be punished if they're being asked to follow? And that's a really tough one, because I think my gut says, yeah, because you're your own person and you have the opportunity to walk away. But on the other hand, if it's your job and you need the money, you need the health benefits, you have a family, that makes it really difficult. So I think ethics and having that power and privilege, someone who has that power and privilege, when they get too much of it, I think it kind of gives them a false sense of reality. And they talked a lot about that in the chapter of making sure you're interrogating reality and perceptions of who you are as the leader. And I liked the part on servant leadership, because that seemed to serve as, you're being aware of your people's needs and the two-way communication. I've worked I haven't worked for anyone who is that severely unethical, but I've worked for, I've had bosses in the past ask me to do things where I'm like kind of questioning it. And it is really difficult because you don't want to just come right out on the spot and be like, and a perfect example is we post recs, and those recs have a timeline on them, and anything over 35 days starts to get questions from senior leaders. And my boss, for example, had asked me to pull it down and repost it. And I thought that was really odd. And then I came back to him and I was like, I just want to clarify, like, how do I distinguish that it's been open still for 35 days and resetting the timer on it? I think little things can cause, people to do, people don't want to get in trouble at work. And then sometimes that can cause unethical behaviors. And that's kind of how it all starts to stem, right? So I think, to your point, Julian, with Wells Fargo, it probably started out as a really small thing, and then it started like probably catching on and spreading, because things like that do. I've also worked for Starbucks for a long time, and we've had pressure to hit sales, and then I've seen managers get fired because they decided they were going to give away, like, it started off like we were supposed to be able to offer a free pound of coffee, and then they took it to a whole other level and went to like 5 pounds of coffee, and then they ended up selling 30 machines. And I think it's those little things that can trickle. But I don't know if, the partners or the employees in the store should be punished, because their leader said it was okay, because they're just following the leader. But on the other hand, you've got Adolf Hitler, and, he had all those people following him and taking people's lives. So it can go to, different extremes. And I think it's hard, right? So you're just like,
Yeah.
It's hard to decide. And I think you just have to be, I've always believed that you just, whatever you gotta walk the talk. And I know for me, it's really hard for me to follow leaders that don't walk the talk. And it's really difficult to work for people like that. So it's definitely a challenge, and it may not be as severe as, a CEO, pulling the wool over someone's eyes, but it's definitely there. And, the same thing with Enron. Because I've been in so many of these different communications classes, that seems to be the topic. And like, they didn't think it was weird that he was selling off millions of dollars of stock and getting, being able to basically benefit from his endorsing of bad behavior. So it's definitely, I think it's also restructured how corporate America, I know we have business ethics and compliance training, and it talks about insider trading. And I'm like, thanks, Enron. I have to do this annoying training every 6 months, because to make sure that you're not, because, you sometimes working for a company, you have privileged information, and you could, and I've never really thought of it, because I'm just by nature not a person who thinks unethically. And I don't know, like, I'm not a salesy person. So, and I'm not saying salesy people, but people who want to take advantage of a situation could definitely do that working for a company. So, and having that privilege to information. So it's definitely a hot topic, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So I'll go. So the book's definition of ethics is standard of moral conduct, what you feel is the right thing to do. And I really like Immanuel Kant's take on ethics, and this is on page 348. He said individuals ought to do what is morally right, no matter what the consequences are. And I really like that. And he said, you could apply by asking yourself, would you want everyone to make the same decision we did? And if the answer is yes, the choice is ethical. And if the answer is no, then the decision is wrong. So I really question all the ethics, in leadership now these days, the whole Wells Fargo fiasco. And so I feel like, I don't think ethics can shape leadership. I feel like, I still believe in my belief that good leaders are born with certain characteristics. And if you can have rules and regulations in place, but if that person is born to be deceitful, and they will circumvent the rules and regulations. And, if they're selfish, arrogant, and abuse their power, no matter what kind of compliance and ethics courses you have in place or training, they'll work around it. I mean, worst case scenario, if it's higher level executives, they'll just throw someone under the bus and let them take the fall. So, you know, a perfect example that I had jotted down was the whole Wells Fargo fiasco. The CEO is not taking accountability. None of the senior leaders were fired, and they're throwing branch managers under the bus. So I don't know if you guys saw the video with who's the senator who grilled the CEO last week, and she said, how's it possible that you're firing all these branch managers that are making minimal compared to what all these higher executives are making? And all he's saying is, oh, we'll let the board decide who gets fired. No, that's not taking accountability. So I feel like everyone is capable of knowing what is the right thing to do, but will they? And I feel like, you know, and that's where the leadership characteristics matter most, is when something happens, well, they will always turn back into their innate characteristics. So page 281, the use of euphemisms, creating pleasant descriptions for unpleasant events. I feel like a lot of politicians now these days just know how to rephrase certain things. And, you know, social media, there's no ethics in social media. They could post whatever they want. And it really, we need to decide if the sources are viable and reliable. And I feel like we are feeding into this, into these unethical behavior, because we're believing everything that we see or hear without verifying the truth. So I feel like we need to do our part and not feeding into these ethical behaviors. That's my piece.
I think it was good. I think we all had really good points to our discussion. And the CEO, John Stumpf, got completely annihilated by that senator. And it was really interesting watching that. And I mean, there's no way that they didn't know it was happening. So I'll give you some like inside information, but there would be issues like with the regional managers where they would go in and they would literally tell branch managers of their region like how many sales numbers they needed for that month. They don't care how you get it done, but you get this many sales numbers for this month. And we all know how it got it done because everyone kind of climbed the scale of getting into that position. So what would happen is they would get all these sales numbers, and then like an internal investigation would be in closing on Wells Fargo. And then the senior leaders of the region would just fire everybody in the branches. Like literally. And so like a close friend of mine was like the guy that they would bring into different branches to just fire everybody. And so he would just go in there he was a branch manager. And so he would go in and be like, yeah, you're fired for, it's called gaming, when you open up accounts and do all these things. And so it was really bad because they were pressuring you to get all these sales. And then like next thing you know, the regional managers were wiping their hands clean because they were just firing everybody. And so for them to say they had no idea that it was happening, it's complete crap.
Right. And I feel like there should be a stiffer consequences for these senior leaders. I mean, you can't just say, oh, I didn't know anything about it and just throw a branch manager under the bus and fire them.
No. Nope. It's interesting because I work at JP Morgan. So like the amount of phone calls I'm now receiving from people that I had been prospecting that have their relationships at Wells Fargo, they're now calling me like, hey, I want to come back. Like I want to come over. I'm ready to do this, whatever. And so it's interesting to see how like these breaches of trust really impact even a huge corporation and a bank. Like people trust their bank for the most part, like their local bank. And so it's interesting and it's unfortunate because it's a good company for other issues, but it's just sad to see that this is going to really, really hurt them. We're at 1 minute left to get to 15. So we did pretty good without Dominic. It was, but is there any other things you guys want to touch on right now?
I think we covered everything. So
yeah, I'm good.
Cool.
Yep.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, then we will talk in a week or before that, and then we'll comment on each other's stuff. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
You too.
All right.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.